While the university is commonly understood to be a place where different knowledge systems enter into dialogue and debate, the institutional structures of the university tend to acculturate and conscript different kinds of knowledge into their own existing categories for what can be known, how knowledge can be organized, and what forms of knowledge are legitimate and credible. The Different Knowing speaker series and interviews address the question of if and how the university can be a place of different knowings, different epistemologies, different knowledges.
I'd like to start the sort of the sound of indigenous knowledge. Was created in the very late 60s in the UN forums. As all of us were trying to collectively talk about our traditions, our teachings that had been passed down to us as indigenous people, to the great, mostly Eurocentric representatives of the state in the UN. And when we talked about indigenous knowledge, there was a lot of questions from the state representatives about just what that was. That became important to us because whenever we find these gaps in the Eurocentric pantheon of rationality, we figured it was an important moment. But then when we asked ourselves what's indigenous knowledge, everyone says, well, it's what we know. It's what we've learned from our folks and our parents and our uncles and things like that. And then the secondary question is, why did all the polished diplomats and statesmen ask us so many questions about this as if it was new? And that brought forward the big concept of Eurocentric thought of how it has an inability to deal with something new outside of its older categories, and why it probably uses analogy and metaphor and other things. But we started thinking about that seriously, mostly on our plane flights home or away to meetings, and had many discussions inside our caucus, the Indigenous caucus, about how we're going to portray the words, and indigenous knowledge was the one that we eventually came to validate as the one to say that, and then we were asked many times what it meant, and we just started describing it as a knowledge system different from the other knowledge systems of the world, from Buddhist, Hindu, Confucianism, and Eurocentrism, and some of the African languages, which were more indigenous than the colonizers' talk. And the original axis was colonized, decolonized, and colonizer, colonized, what they know and how they know it. They had developed some strange wording about that this was women's knowledge sometimes, it was poor people's knowledge, and different kind of vernaculars in the Eurocentric Academy. And we had to work through that as a knowledge system, but the task before us in the human rights commissions was defining our humanity, or in the modern parlance of, are we a people under the human rights covenants? And the nation states were saying no. We're not the right kind of people. We're the wrong kind of people. And we knew about the debates of in the Vatican and the Spanish government about whether the newly found people of South America were humans or not humans, and they had a big debate on that. And we knew about the human status of Indians in Canada until 1951 was really non-persons. That a person was defined in the Indian Act and Interpretive Acts as anyone other than the Indian. So we were the official non-Indian. So our whole discourse was one, that we're humans and we deserve human rights as well as anyone else, and we deserve the protection of the human rights laws as well as anyone else. But that led us directly into a battle with them about whether we were human, which was, devastatingly terrible ritual of them as the state party's delegates saying, "You're not a human." And we would look around and say, "Which one's he talking about?" We couldn't believe that he was talking about us. But we weren't going to let him get away with that with our sisters and brothers and all that stuff. So we just had to take the humiliation of the Eurocentric mind that whatever category it was we're too dark or too light or too this or too that or too male or too female, all their categorical constructs. Led us to articulate and start to articulate as part of Indigenous knowledge. We first articulated Indigenous science, because that's where the battle began. Was our knowledge scientific? And we finally proved to the world scientists that it was. But then we switched, and there was an argument that was brewing all along to the concept that we're indigenous and we're humans, and then we just unified that by saying we're indigenous. There is a thing called Indigenous Humanities, which is what we think humans are doing from our teachings and what we think human nature is, and finally what we think human rights should protect. And that was the evolution of the standard in the biggest forum in the world, in the UN, with all the decolonized Asian and African states having the chance to even the score with Eurocentric power by supporting what the Eurocentric power considered the most ambiguous and incoherent term of indigenous knowledge, that we weren't supposed to have knowledge. The deficits that we had that were created with the Eurocentric writers was long and dishonorable. And so they were holding to that, and all the previously colonized people were using indigenous people initially as an example to push the hegemony of Eurocentrism to a more balanced relationship with other knowledge systems. But these are other knowledge systems of empire, the Islamic empires and the Chinese empire and the Japanese empire and all that stuff. But in the end, we started arguing with them too. But that was okay, because it was the only place in the world you could debate a concept so lethal as being a non-person and having no humanities and having no philosophy and having no writings and having no thoughts and having no laws and having no government and having no sovereignty. And the list was a perfect dualism that we had to endure and make them try and justify their comments. And they eventually couldn't justify it. And so that's how the concepts arose. It didn't arise from academics sitting around thinking about it. It would still probably not happen if we relied on that. But this is world action with us struggling for our humanity and struggling for our knowledge systems and struggling to preserve our knowledge systems.